Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. And today we're going to do a webinar on TMS WebCore. My name is Ian Barker, and I'm an Embarcadero MVP. And joining me today is Dr. Holger Flick, who is also an Embarcadero MVP, and he is also dual role here as the evangelist. I think that's probably the right term, isn't it, Holger, for TMS software. Hello,
Yes,
Holger.
that is. Hi, Ian. How are you doing? I hope you're not as much affected by the wind that's blowing your way right now.
No, we're dodging the hurricane. We're just getting sunburn. It's Texas. What can I say? Always hot, except when it isn't. Okay, so today we're going to do a live presentation. Holger is going to do that. I'm not as brave as that. I would probably pre-record mine. But whilst Holger is doing his demonstration, we'll try and answer questions as we go along. And Holger, during the presentation, we will try and address some of the questions as they come up, but it depends on what they are. So if you've got any questions, just type them in the question window down there. But for now, it's going to be about 45 minutes, we think, for the presentation, minimum. We probably are going to take longer than an hour, so just warn you ahead of time. We know we did a presentation for Embarcadero Germany, and it went to 90 minutes. So we're not going to try and take too long, but just be forewarned that it may take us a little while to answer all the questions. So with that said, I'll hand you over to Holger. Good luck, Holger. Live demonstration coming up.
And we are recording this, so if you do have to step out at the last minute or whatever, you can catch the replay later. So.
Well said. Yes, I forgot about that.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys, for the introduction. Thank you also for the invite to do a webinar all based on web development in Delphi using TMS WebCore. My person has already been introduced. You also have additional information resources on the first slide. You can also email me directly if you have any follow-up questions to this webinar. And also, of course, I think YouTube is the platform it's being published on. Comment on the video. We'll read those as well. So this webinar is really not requiring any prior knowledge of TMS WebCore. That's why we named it Web Development in Delphi. As an introduction, you can create web applications with TMS WebCore, meaning it's a framework to develop web applications, and the tools that you are going to use to develop those web applications are going to be Object Pascal and the Delphi IDE or Red Studio, whatever name you prefer. And the key feature of TMS WebCore is that it's object-oriented and it's RAD, Rapid Application Development, meaning it was a primary concern when the framework was developed that the principles that made Delphi and still makes Delphi one of the best development tool for the desktop, that you can drop components on a form, customize those components in the object inspector, assign events to those components, what is going to happen when the user interacts with these components. And that was the primary objective, to have this kind of functionality also on the web for web applications, and also to abstract from web-specific principles as best as possible, meaning that you can concentrate on building your application with Delphi. And that is also what leads to the next point, because websites are usually designed in HTML with CSS style sheets, and then you add some JavaScript here and there. And with TMS WebCore, you can pick what you want to do. You can pick the traditional approach, just using a form designer in Delphi. You can pick a mix of HTML and the form designer, or if your company has a web design department or the web design has already been created, you can use that web design completely and just build the application logic in Delphi using TMS WebCore and use the design that is already there. So it is actually quite easy to work together with web designers. If you communicate with them certain things, you can use existing designs pretty easily. And that is not only true for the designs, it's also true for existing JavaScript frameworks, because a lot of customers I know already have existing JavaScript functionality which are company specific, be it algorithms to generate certain numbers or certain formulae, you can import those and include those in TMS WebCore applications if you already have things in JavaScript. Deployment is going to be a simple Xcopy deployment, as we call it. It means you copy the HTML files, CSS files, the resources of your web application, and the JavaScript file, which is your application, onto a web server. That can be any web server. There's really no requirement. You can download a very simple freeware web server, and it will work with TMS WebCore without any issues. And of course, you can also, TMS WebCore provides also components to interact with other web services and cloud services. You can either pick to implement the functionality yourself on a very basic level, meaning you have components for HTTP, HTTPS to access these web services and cloud services, or you can pick pre-configured components, for example, for Google Maps or Twitter, where you simply specify user information and the interaction with the API is handled by TMS WebCore. As application types, we now have in TMS WebCore with version 1.5, the first version only had the classic web client application, which is an HTML document with functionality. And then later on, the installable mobile applications were added. Formerly, they're called progressive web applications. And the key fact about these applications is that you can use them offline on mobile devices, meaning the web application is downloaded from the web server onto your mobile device, and you can start the web application, yes, even though it's a web application, on your device, even though you're not connected to your internet. So that is the perfect application to use if you want to implement something like the briefcase model. For example, you have to deliver packages, and the package delivery person comes into the office, downloads the information, which packages to deliver, and without having to be connected to the internet all the time, information can be collected on the delivery route, and then when returning to the office, the data can be synced again. And also application updates are also being monitored, meaning if you start this mobile application again, updates are being downloaded from the web server completely without any work of yours. And for all devices, they integrate nicely on the home screen, so your users probably will not realize that it is the web application that they're using. And then with the release 1.4, TMS introduced the desktop applications that are developed as web applications. That may sound a little bit strange at first, but you develop a web application, and with a framework which is called the Electron framework, these web applications are compiled to a Windows, Mac OS, or Linux binary. So you get a binary application that can have a desktop icon and can really be started on a desktop computer. It looks like a desktop application. You probably, if you're in the United States, you've probably heard of QuickBooks, which is an accounting software, and this software is written in the Electron framework nowadays. So if you buy their product, they offer a subscription, which is just in the browser online, and then they still offer their desktop software. And the desktop software is actually just the same web application that they use. It just uses the Electron framework, so you can use it on your desktop without having a internet connection. And with regards to architecture, there's the big difference to other web frameworks that exist for Delphi. The TMS WebCore uses the approach that the JavaScript application is only grabbed once from your web server and is completely executed in your web browser, and then the application is contained in your web browser. The JavaScript runs in your web browser, and even when you navigate between different forms in your Delphi application, the web browser does not request additional data from the web server. So the hit you take when you use a TMS WebCore application usually is when you enter the URL to access the application is downloaded and is then executed in the web browser. The only difficulty that arrives then is that if you connect to databases, of course, as the application is executed in your web browser, you have to access your databases differently using web services, REST web service endpoints. I'm going to focus on that a little bit later. So as a demonstration, at first, I would like to show you how how TMS WebCore integrates into Delphi 10.4 Sydney, that you see that you really can use something that you're used to inside of the Delphi IDE and just develop web applications. Any questions so far, Ian?
Only general questions, not really about TMS WebCore yet. Don't worry, the flood will begin as soon as you pause too much.
Yeah. No, I'm just, you know, it's like if somebody had a question to the different application types already or something.
No, they're mostly about webinar audio not working because something went wrong. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so the integration into the Delphi IDE is pretty much unnoticeable, and that's what makes it great for you as a developer, because it integrates into something that you know by heart. And you go to File, New, Other, and then you have the TMS Web branch where you have all the different application types to create a new application. And the standard TMS Web application, we're going to create it like this. Okay. And then we see the form designer, and I align my controls a little bit differently. I know I'm a little bit strange that way. It always gets pointed out to me at conferences, like, why do you have that on the right side? I don't know why. Some people claim when I used Visual Studio for a little bit, that ran over. I don't know, because they have it on the right as well. So on the left.
Do you want to know something weird? I do exactly the same thing. So we're obviously both crazy in the same way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it that way. It seems more natural to me to have everything on the right. So yeah.
Exactly. So what you see here, the project has the extension .web. You get a main HTML file, which is the entry point into your application. Then you get a starting point with a form, unit 1 pass as the default name. And if you expand it, you get the DFM file, which is something that every VCL application has. But in addition to this, you also get the HTML file, which just refers to this form. So if your web designer has a design, you can add it to this HTML file and then link it to things that are on the design surface here. I'll show an example for that later. But even if you don't want to do anything complicated, and this is what I said, like, you can get started very quickly with concepts that you've known since Delphi 1. So the TMS Web, all these components here are components that you get with TMS WebCore if you purchase a license. So it's not just like standard components and you have to buy additional components. No, you get like the standard components, like a button, edit control, and you see it all works like you used to from the VCL. So if you just want to get started at first and HTML and CSS has been the hurdle for you, fear not, TMS WebCore might be the solution you have been waiting for. So the web button, we can name it, you know, button action, for example. You can set a caption, and in the web edit, I'm not going to rename it, but you see that all the properties and everything have been more or less aligned to what you're used to from the VCL. So if I wanted to put the time into the or the date, the current date, into this web edit, I can double click the button and implement the button action click event and say web edit 1 dot text. You see code completion is available equals date to string. This shows you all the runtime library things that you're used to from Delphi are also available. And date to string, and now gives you the current date. And then it's really as simple as run. You can run without debugging because debugging is handled by your web browser. And there you go. And we click action. And then we have a running, working web application. And this is the fastest way to build web applications without any HTML, CSS. However, you have the option to add as much as you want, or you're even able to build your application without doing any design in the form design, which I'm going to show later. But before I go on with that, let me show you a few more components that you have. So you have memos, checkboxes, all of those, progress bars. You have components to have the ownership model in place, like panel. You have grid panels that align things automatically, which you see here. You have menus, you have dialog boxes. The most important thing is that you also have components that you can drop, like a panel that have responsive functionality. So even without using any CSS or HTML, you as a Delphi developer with your brain still on the desktop can use these controls that make it possible if you run if your web application is shown on different devices with smaller screens, bigger screens, the controls that you put on these grids are aligned automatically depending on the size of the display. So these controls are provided if you don't want to use any CSS or HTML at all. It's being generated for you and make access to the web for you a very easy process at first. Here you see a few more complex components, like you have calendar, you have Google Maps. You can, of course, embed other internet or web pages, YouTube, Twitter, Google Chart. You have integration of PayPal. There is really a lot of stuff that you can get with a click of a button. So, like if you want a Twitter feed, you drop it, and then the only thing you have to do is you specify which feed and all that kind of stuff, and it's being shown at design time. Okay, going back to the slides. If there are no questions to that?
There are actually some questions. I'm kind of dealing with them as they come on. One of the questions was to do with progressive web apps, and in fact, the questioner, Jeff, I think it was, said PWM, but he meant PWA. His question was, will a progressive web app work on a desktop as well, if you've got a desktop browser that supports it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
for example, the Chrome, as it's basically progressive web apps, don't sue me for it if it's wrong, but as far as I know, it's an invention from Google, and that makes it a good candidate even in Chrome on desktop. So even on desktop, you basically get a full screen view and all that kind of stuff if you use it in Chrome. I would think the new Microsoft Edge browser, which is based or has Chrome at its core, will do it just as good. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean my experience of the new Edge is that everything that Chrome did, Edge does it, and it works the same way. Certainly when I tested some WebCore apps, everything in Edge worked exactly the same as every other browser, and there wasn't any issues. I didn't notice any anyway.
So I will point out, actually, before Microsoft made the switch from to the new Edge, we're using Chromium based, they were a proponent of the progressive web app. Apple was the only of the big three that was not on board with the progressive web app movement. So Microsoft does do what they can to support it, and has for a while.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jim. I wasn't certain how the development there was, because I have to be honest, the first time I got in touch with PWAs was actually with TMS WebCore, because to my shame, I have to admit, I never coded JavaScript myself. I have always been like a Delphi developer and never.
There's no shame in not doing JavaScript.
There's no shame.
So what I skimmed a little bit over and I realized that now while answering these questions. Just quick, what happens when you compile your application? Because there's always a few questions to this. Because as you can see, this is all Delphi source code. And what happens is if you compile your application, your Delphi source code is actually compiled into JavaScript. So if you right-click your project, you get the output path open possibility. Let's see here. And there you see that you get an HTML file. I didn't save my project. That's why there's like old files, as you can see from 2019 here. Let me delete them. So what you get is a JavaScript file, which is your application. You get the entry point, which is project 1 HTML in this case. You get a map file, which contains debug information. So what this file does is you can actually debug your code inside of the browser in Delphi. Let me show that to you. So you can actually click right here, set a breakpoint inside of the Delphi IDE, run this. You have to click F12 for the developer console. You can go to the console. This is all here related to the Twitter that I didn't set it. And then if I click Action, there you see paused and debugger. And the crazy thing is you do not see the JavaScript that's being executed. You actually see the Pascal code right here as if you were inside of the Delphi IDE, and you can execute these things with the value and everything. That's all possible. You also get the call stack, and you see it in Pascal. You don't see it in JavaScript, and that's, I think, is an amazing feature. Just be certain if you deploy your application at a later point that you do not deploy the map file, because that is basically the meta information about your coding, and you wouldn't want that on your production web server for your customers to see. So that is for debugging purposes. Unit 1, of course, is the design of your form, and that is the design of the whole project. I skimmed over that a little bit. I think that is all that needs to be said, how these applications work. And that makes it so easy to integrate existing JavaScript frameworks, because your Pascal code is compiled into JavaScript. So the ASM, which is used in the VCL to include assembler code in TMS WebCore, can actually be used to write JavaScript. And in addition to that, there is classes that allow you to use JavaScript classes as Delphi classes. So for example, Java has a JS array, which is a JavaScript array. You can use that inside of your Delphi code and work with these. So interoperability to existing frameworks and other JavaScript is amazing. The biggest question, though, or the biggest hurdle for a lot of customers, or interested parties, I should say, is web design, because there is, most of the time there's two rough edges, basically. There's either no wish for web design at all. There's just supposed to be a form. You enter values, and then you generate a report form of some sort, and it has to be on the web. And these customers do not care that much about design. For them, it's more important to be able to use basically many years of source code that they have in Delphi, and want to be able to use it on the web and want to use their know-how on the web. So the form designer for them is most of the time the best approach, because you drop the components on the form and you can include the units that you already have and build a web application that way. However, if you want to build more advanced forms, it might be beneficial to use some HTML and CSS elements in addition. And of course, big companies, I think that is rather common. They would not have a Delphi developer do the web design, because everybody is supposed to do what he or she does best. And Delphi developers, I can only talk about myself, but my wife is an art teacher, and the relationship she has to color, form, and texture is definitely different to what I feel as a Delphi developer. So I would say a web designer always does a better job. So you can actually have somebody do the web design and simply include it in your application and fully concentrate on the development of your application if you want to do that. And for that, TMS WebCore gives you great components to facilitate all that. The TWebElementActionList, for example, is, well, yeah, if you remember in the VCL, we have action lists, and the web transfer is the web element action list. So you can hook up these actions, for example, click on a button, click here, click here. You can link this to the action list, and then if the user clicks on this button, write Delphi code. And that's the first example I would like to show. So
we've got quite a few questions come up, which some of them I've got Bruno to answer, because Bruno is not actually on the webinar itself. He is here, he's watching, but we're actually talking to him via chat.
Maybe a short introduction. Bruno is the CEO of TMS Software, and he's the mastermind behind TMS WebCore.
He is the man, capital T, capital M. He quite often joins in on one of these things, but after his noisy keyboard, that's it. He's banned forever. But at the last conference, but any of the answers that Bruno has given, I've prefixed with from Bruno so that people know it's a kind of authoritative answer. If I just ask a couple of the questions whilst we're at it. Eric asks, what kind of app do I get at the end? I currently work with IntraWeb, so I am ISAPI DLL. I think,
so that is the big difference. Like with IntraWeb, you have the web server basically that is being generated if you start your EXE or you get an ISAPI module. And with TMS WebCore, you just get HTML content and JavaScript. So you can use it on any web server that you desire. You can use it on a Linux web server. You can buy a 99 buck Raspberry Pi, run a web server, and put it on that. It's pure JavaScript with HTML. So there is nothing platform specific, meaning you can use any web server that is out there. If your satellite receiver has a web server running, you can deploy your web application to that, and it will work just fine.
That's kind of the difference here, is that this is generating content that runs inside the web browser, right? So you can use it with your existing ISAPI server backend, right? And so all you do is expose a web service, a REST service of some sort, that then is consumed by this client application that you're building in the browser. So if you think of the layers that you have, this is the presentation layer of the application. So you can still have your backend built in whatever.
Exactly. That's it. So you just have on your web server, you say, hey, this directory contains the files that have been generated by TMS WebCore, and the web server will do the rest. You know, the initial HTML here will make sure, if you look into it, contains a few definitions, but the most important definition is running out of screen space. The important one is, if you go into the code, if you see that it just executes the script, the project name, which is your application. So the application completely runs in your browser and not on the server, and that is the big difference. So it's only copied to your browser or downloaded to your browser, and then it can run completely independent from your web server. So there's no connection.
So this is probably a good time. There's a question here about how you would access a backend database. Like, do you use like the FireDAC components, or what is it you use to connect to a backend database?
So you can't use FireDAC because FireDAC requires you to have a connection to a database server, and your browser, for security reasons, you will never find a database server that is directly accessible through another browser. So what you do is you use a REST web service and request resources from this REST web service. I have an example for that that I will show after doing the design. If you stay with me, then I'll show you the VCL application first, and then I show you how you can migrate your, obviously I can't show you how to migrate it step by step, but I can show you what the VCL application looks like, and then I can switch over to the web application. You will immediately understand how to set it all up. And for the backend, you can use any REST server or web service, and there is plenty of web service tools out there. There is DataSnap, there is Red Server. Did I say this correctly, Jim? Red Server,
Yes. Yep.
Right? And of course, from TMS, there is XData, and all these tools have different strengths. If you have existing databases, to automatically generate the endpoints that you need for your web application to show information, or even with regards to XData, you can even generate endpoints that automatically let you, if you show a grid in your web application, that you can make changes in your grid, and with a click of a button, these changes are sent through the web service interface into the database. So all of these frameworks have different strengths and different functionality where you have to pick the best one for you. What is important to point out is, though, that if your software development is split up, and for example, your database department or whatever uses ASP.NET Web API, for example, to publish content from a database, no problem. You can access that as well, because you can, flexibility-wise, you can either use controls or components that are pre-built, that are there for Red Server, for XData. These make development for you quick, pretty easy. But you can also do any other web service using HTTP calls with controls that are available. Let me switch to that, and I can show you the difference between them. So for example, if you were to use an XData server, you have an XData connection, you have a client and a data set to quickly access anything that that is XData. And you have the same thing for the Red Server from Embarcadero. So, but if you wanted to use something generic, you can use the HTTP request to get any content from the internet, whatever it may be. So depending on what your server uses, the work you have to do on the client side is either very, very little, because if you use XData, you have a control for that, or is a little bit more exhaustive, because you have to write everything that the XData component delivers for you. You have to write that yourself. I hope that answered the question in great detail. So back to design, if I may, if there's no other questions to the other stuff.
There are quite a few. I'm answering several of them as we go along. I think we'll probably pause at some point and address a few questions, but for now, so I think if you carry on.
Yes.
A lot of the questions are preempting your demo. So
okay, so I'll basically show how the different designs work, and this is like the mix step where you use a layout that has been downloaded. You saw the layout on the slide, and now you can define in your HTML, if you look, the ID, each HTML tag, and that is as much HTML as I know when it comes to design. I can write an ID tag, and that gives me the opportunity to link it to an action in here. And you see here, there's the ID, and it lists all the IDs that you have. And register is the ID of the button register. And just like in an action list in the VCL, you can link this ID to the element. The event is the click event in this case. And then you on execute, you can implement what is supposed to happen when that is clicked. And guess what? You're back in Delphi. So you link your form or your design to Delphi code using a control, and can implement everything that has happened. For example, this demonstration shows you how to validate if everything has been specified. Has the name, email, and everything been specified? That is all being executed in Delphi. So what does not come out of Delphi is this design. This was downloaded from a web page as a template, and then you can link this to your Delphi code, and the button is linked to the action list. So if I click register, it says please provide the check if the data has been provided is being done in Delphi code. So as soon as I provide something, I don't know if I have to. Thank you, Holger, for registering for basic. So it reads the values, and that is the so-called mixed approach, where you take design and define some of the code with an action list inside of your form designer. What you can also do is you can select certain elements from your design this way. For example, if you have an edit control, and I have to shorten this a bit to be able to show you the other example, this is an edit control that allows you to enter text. And if I wanted to bind this edit control to one of the controls inside of the design, I yet again have the element ID property. And here I can then, for example, select full name. And now if I make changes to this control with my Pascal language in source code, this affects the design or the behavior of the control in design that has been defined by somebody else. If I don't define my design myself, if I set that clearly. So you have the option to add programming in Delphi to existing designs and add your application logic that way if you don't feel comfortable designing, or if you need more than the design that is possible inside of the form designer here. And the next step, if you're really like in a big company, or if you want to download, and this is the example, if you just want to download a template from a web page and want to use that template. So here you see what the main form looks like in the Delphi designer. You have the order number, text field, a date, an order date, a button, a title of the page, and you have a frame, which is another feature of TMS WebCore, that you can define frames. And inside of these frames, you have labels, and inside of the frame, you also have an action list. So this action list actually handles the navigation, and this is the content of the main form. Now, if we start this, okay, let me close all these. You see that design comes completely out of the template, but still you set, like here's the menu, orders, customers, config, and everything is handled inside of code. So if you click search order, searching order, and if you go to double click the button, you see show message, searching order. So that is how you can completely rely on a design that is being done externally and still you write your application logic in Delphi. And the key to all of this is always the element ID, as you can see here, okay? It's set in source code here. That's why I don't see it. So that is how it works to connect the form designer to the existing design. And if you're like, oh my God, how would I know what is available and what isn't? The first step from TMS was, hey, we have this element ID right here where you can select. The next step in version 1.4 was that you have the control binding where you see where you can assign web button to an HTML element, and then you can click here, or you can click that you want to bind an HTML element to a control. But TMS didn't stop here. They also offer, I'm not going to show it, the control sync, where all the controls that are inside of the template are being added to the form. So you don't have to drop the controls manually. If there's a combo box in the design, a combo box is added to the form, and so on. So you really have the biggest flexibility there is to design your form. So you either take the approach to build it like in a VCL with absolute positioning, not a lot of HTML design. You pick the mixed approach. You pick the mixed approach when it comes to using action lists. And then you can also say, hey, I'm only going to do my application logic in Delphi, and the design is completely in HTML. And that is what this shows. And a new feature in version 1.5, because I agree it's very difficult to make changes to this. So TMS added the live preview. So as you click here, either in the toolbar or in the form, you can here click live preview. Let me select it here. You get a live preview from the form, what it looks like. And I can't really show you because as soon as I click here, it vanishes, but you just have to believe me that I don't pull up a second form somewhere. So let me change here the orders to test for change, enter, save it, and then I go back to here and boom, the update, and it's really a live preview. So if you have two displays, I don't know a single developer who doesn't have at least two displays. You can put this on the non-IDE screen, as I call it, and then you can design your web forms using the Delphi designer with live preview in that way.
And the live preview is a feature of 1.5, isn't it? That's right.
Yes.
Am I right in saying that?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I developed a couple of web apps with this, commercially available ones, with TMS WebCore, and the reason I participate in these webinars is because I'm a big fan of it. I said from the very first time I saw it, it was a brilliant implementation. And for Delphi developers, it's almost a no-brainer if you're going to do interactive websites. The only thing that was missing, I thought, was the previewing, because you would have to run the app and then, you know, go into the website that way. But with the live preview, it's it would have made things a lot quicker for me actually when I developed the apps, because it was before 1.5. I think it's a definite plus to make that live preview work. It's good stuff.
Exactly, and all those basics, different form styles, absolute positioning, relative positioning, what is responsive web design, explained from the perspective of a Delphi developer, mainly me. And I wrote two books about it, one in German, one in English. It's the same content, obviously, I translated it. This would get you started with TMS WebCore. I know it's a relentless plug for my own book, but
nothing wrong with that.
As you said, there's so many questions out there with regards to how to get started web design. This was written when 1.4 was not yet released, but I had access to 1.4. So this is actually including all the features of 1.4. So you won't find live preview mentioned in the book, for example, because that is brand new. But everything else, all the principles, everything like how to access databases, web services, all in there, and how to read JSON, how to incorporate JavaScript in it. And the final chapter gives you an example how to build a database web service of a database that is freely available, so you can reproduce the example step by step. You build the web service, you build the web client, you build different web clients with Google Charts, Google Maps, and that has been where I got the most feedback from. Actually, it was so much feedback, people loved it so much that we decided to basically focus on just giving examples. So this book, and with regard to the question that came before, this book shows you how you can build with a huge database, 8.5 million records, also freely available, a web service. The web service is instantaneous. You type, I do a query from a company name. You type in an edit field in a web application, and you get suggestions which company name it could be from a database with 8.5 million companies, and it's instantaneous. And this book basically sheds away all the prejudice about web services being slow and all that stuff. You also learn about desktop clients. you learn about you learn about reporting as well. And next week, Monday, I think we're going to announce on Monday. I handed it in today. I blogged about it. We're going to continue the concept, more examples for cross-framework, cross-platform, cross-service development. This book also has lots of VCL examples, web examples with REST service, with FireDAC, all Delphi. So these books give you a pretty good idea how to build the architecture of the applications with Delphi, using project groups, building the server, building the VCL client, building the web client. So these books are all available on Amazon worldwide, paperback only for legal reasons. So it's always going to be paperback. There's no PDF available.
I was going to ask, where could you get hold of them? When I looked to find the books myself, all I did was a Google search on TMS WebCore on Amazon, and up it came. So it wasn't very difficult to find it if they don't know where the links are to click to go and see the Amazon listings and stuff like that. Are they on the TMS website? I think they are, aren't they?
Yes, and they're also on my blog, and I'll write. That's actually the next to do that I have, to write a web application that gets you to the auto link for each book.
Oh, if only there was a system where you could just write Delphi code and it would produce a web page. If only that exists. Oh, wait, there is one.
Exactly, it does exist. So. So this is something I've been tinkering with, and this is not prepared. So while answering questions, I'm going to do this. So I produced a hands-on video a couple of weeks ago that showed how you could access a database. You see the database right here. It's a SQLite database. It contains, I think, 3 or 6 million. I don't want to exaggerate. Let's make it 3 million records. All the accidents in the United States from 2016 till 2020, June 2020. And I use FireDAC to access this database. And this is, as you can see, a VCL application, hopefully without having it tested. Oh, wonderful. I'm stuck here. Let me see. Oh, I know why.
We did say it was a live demonstration, ladies and gentlemen.
Exactly. It's the conditional. I have to define the VCL. That should work.
You're like the stunt man of Embarcadero's presentations. This is what it is.
Yeah.
You would be the guy that walks out in a suit and sets fire to it and goes, "I'll be okay."
Exactly. So here you see this is a VCL application built with FNC maps. We can't go into that. That's a framework. So Florida, Bruno's birthday, show incidents, boom. So this is done using VCL code. So I separated the code that basically adds everything to the map from the code that pulls everything from the data module from the database using queries. That's in short. So this is a VCL application like you have been writing it since Delphi 1 with database support. And in order to get this to TMS WebCore, what you need to do, and you're definitely going to hear about this in the future, is you have to build a web service. And this web service basically needs to get the list of the states. You saw the combo box on the left, right? And it needs to get the date limits from the database, which accidents dates are covered. And then you need to be able to get all the incidents on a certain date in a certain state. That's basically all the web service needs to do. And that is the power, Nick Hodges can tell you about it, of interfaces, because like this is the web application. It uses, of course, the service. This is the only one that doesn't use the unit directly, but it uses the service. But for example, the FireMonkey application uses the interface, and also the very same VCL application also uses the web service instead of the direct database connection. So that is probably the best thing to show you right now. So you see the main form is exactly the same. The only difference is that instead of having a data module with the Fire Deck components on it, it's empty. Instead, you have the Xdata client, and the Xdata client runs, of course, on my local system here and just calls the service methods. And this is the service that I just showed you. And then you can say get date limits, get the incidents for a date and a state, and you pass this with parameters. And so you transfer your existing VCL directly connected database application by building the Xdata server that I'm going to start. And you can use the Red server as well. I don't want to really go on that. So here you see it runs on localhost port 80. And then I do the Xdata server project, run it, Lincoln. And there you go. And now the data no longer is coming from the database directly. It goes through the Xdata server. But what you can see is it looks exactly the same as before. We just use a web service backend instead of a direct connection to the database. And because we use TMS WebCore, and this is what makes TMS WebCore so powerful, I show you, I closed these intentionally. The only thing still open is the web servers right here. And this is the web project. I compile the web project. It's being translated to JavaScript, of course. And my browser is right here. So you see, you can use the exact same principles. You have your combo box, you can select the state. You can enter the date. You have your date picker component. You can click show incident. Same code. It's, believe me, I'll make this demo will become public at some point. And parts of it are in the book that's going to be released next week. But you see, it's exactly the same map. If you don't believe me, I left the application open. So this is truly true cross-platform and also cross-framework, because here I use the web, here I use the VCL, and believe it or not, you can use the same approach with a FireMonkey application. Here's your main form in FireMonkey. This is really a FireMonkey project. You can also do Android, and this is now for Windows 32. And it always uses the same database backend. That's the key thing to remember. It all uses the Xdata server as its backend. If you see, this is 4/18/2020, show incidents, poof, and same result again. So here we have Windows application with FireMonkey. I could compile to macOS just as easily. And I think Bruno posted it online. I also did one on the Fire TV. So if you are in the signage business, you can deploy to Kindle devices, Fire TV devices, because it's Android, you know, that works just as well. And yeah, the web application, of course, is in the browser right here. So you have 3 applications that share the same source code, and you only implemented it once. The only thing that because I am not big on designing forms in code, the pros at TMS software, they even do the form layout in code. They say like T combo box create, and of course with FNC, I could use the same combo box in all 3 frameworks. So that is.
I think I'll just interject there as well. That I wouldn't want to do it in code either. And given that you can actually get a web designer to design the web pages and then use the WebCore as a kind of controlling back end, you know, so the web pages act like a template, and the code in the background is doing the work. you know, if you want to split up that design so that someone else is doing it, someone who's like a professional web designer, or that's what they do, then I think that's one of the main benefits. I think once you start to put the forms in code and generate the forms in code, then that's when you lose that flexibility, because you can't then go and hand some HTML to someone who's a web designer who says, oh, I'll tweak the web page for you. Well, if you know, if you've converted it all to code, that's not going to be possible, and I think you move yourself down a bit of a dark alley there, really.
Yeah, and if some people are afraid, oh my God, I will never be able to build the web service, don't be afraid. You remember from the VCL, from the very first VCL application I showed, you actually can use the same data module inside of your web service. The only thing you need to do is you do not link your visual components to your queries. You return the queries as lists of objects and simply iterate. As you can see here, for example, the incidents are being iterated just like you've done it for years and years with Delphi using FireDeck queries, and then you can simply return a list of objects. And these objects I defined in a unit that is also being used for all the applications, be it the VCL Xdata application, be it the FireMonkey Xdata application, or be it the web Xdata application. It's all the same thing. It works over all platforms and all frameworks. That's the power of Delphi right there, because you have compilers for all these platforms, and of course, that is the only thing you have to separate your code. If you have your database code inside of your form, of course, you would need to copy paste and wouldn't be able to do it this easily by using the same unit in all of the frameworks. Coming back to
a project that I just recently did, I think I spoke about it in the fireside chat with Jim. I had a number of classes and libraries and some business logic that was separated out quite nicely and wasn't on the forms, because you want to avoid doing that. And because of that, I was able to reuse a lot of code, not all of it, because there are differences in the way the web applications work. Obviously, that's a limitation of running in a browser instead of on a desktop or on a mobile device natively. But the reuse was pretty high, and I was able to produce, a web app which the people I was working for were very pleased with, and so I can't believe it was done so quick and so efficiently. And it really was down to the reuse of units that had already been kind of tried and tested in desktop app.
Yeah, that is really the power of TMS WebCore, that you can reuse your code. It makes it an amazing tool to get your applications out to the web because of that. And you also the independence of any web server, because you don't deploy a binary, you deploy a web application that can be run on any platform. Yeah, this is something I was told by Embarcadero, or handed by Embarcadero, I should say. Embarcadero is offering us, or you as listeners of this webinar, 25% savings on Delphi and TMS WebCore. It's valid from August 17th to September 30th. And you see the coupon codes right there. I said, Embarcadero said, hey, here's the slide. Please use it when you do the webinar. If there are any questions regarding sales, and that's the only thing I'm going to say to sales, is email TMS WebCore or Embarcadero, because they know about these.
Yeah, I mean, Bruno is on the chat. We were going to actually make him a co-presenter on this so that he could answer questions, but that didn't work out. but we've not excluded him deliberately. He is here and he's participating in chat in the background. So he's making me look good because I'm answering all the questions. But to be fair, I am saying it's Bruno answering them rather than me.
Yeah, and I'm really happy that I have audio, because I was sweating my pants. when
yeah, we had a minor panic, everybody, just before we started, because Holger, who was, he's presenting this live, he couldn't actually hear anything, and he couldn't actually, we couldn't hear him either. So we thought at one moment we were going to have to reschedule the webinar, but no, we managed to survive, and it's all going good. Okay, I've answered a lot of the questions. I don't think we need to read through them because there are quite a lot of them. The remaining ones are really sort of esoteric questions that we've already answered about progressive web apps. There is one about how to print without a print dialog in a progressive web app or Electron app. Do you know the answer to that question, Holger?
Yes, it's all handled by the web browser and the underlying operating system. If Apple thinks you need to see a dialog, you're going to see a dialog. It's just as simple. I mean, there is nothing you can do because the application runs in a browser in an environment that is designed to run JavaScript, and you have no low-level access to printing dialogues, to menu items and stuff like that. You can't
and a few other things as well, like you can't have any pointers. Because JavaScript doesn't support them. There are some workarounds for some of the classes and interfaces that in effect would be a pointer, and they're kind of not emulated, but there's a workaround that works with that. But array of interface, for example, if you actually look at the Paz2JS wiki, it quite clearly says we're not going to ever do that. It's something we can't support and we won't support because it doesn't apply to JavaScript.
As an alternative to the printing, I might offer a solution with regards to simply using PDF and producing a PDF download or showing a PDF, because nowadays modern browsers can show PDFs natively. And so you would be able to generate a PDF file, and then you would circumvent the print dialog. Simply, if you download the PDF, the user can decide if the PDF is to be printed, stored, or what is supposed to be done with it. And PDF functionality is available now, client-side even, and also another part of the FNC Core framework. I don't know the licensing with FNC Core. I'm a little bit uncertain on that. It's not one of all the FNC packages are based on a core, and so I don't know if FNC Core, what you need to purchase in order to use it, but there is definitely PDF functionality in there so that all FNC packages can produce PDF, but the API or the classes are available for use. It's not just internal classes. You can use these PDF classes to generate PDF documents, and that way you can even generate better printouts than just the web page printout.
Yeah, and in fact, Bruno's just messaged to say that if you're targeting Electron, the Electron framework, then Electron actually exposes access to the printers on whichever device it's connected to, within limitations, like you say, based on iOS and stuff like that. For progressive web apps, it's the browser, because even though it looks like an app, it's running in its own little window. It is actually still a browser and window. And he also says regarding FNC, any FNC product comes with the FNC Core free. So I think that he's saying that you would need to buy something FNC to get FNC Core. I think that's what he's saying. So yeah,
I think that's how it is.
Yeah. I mean, the all access subscription, that's what I use, and I would recommend to most people, because although we're talking about WebCore here, and as I say every time, we're not trying to make this into a sales pitch for TMS, but if they keep making good stuff, then we're going to keep talking about it. But if you use the all access subscription, it works out extremely economical for a massive, overwhelming range of components. So if you're doing any development, there's just so many of them that you probably won't use them all. That's how comprehensive it is. There's absolutely everything from connecting to things like OneDrive and all sorts of mapping services and stuff like that on your desktop, as well as the FNC libraries that work on absolutely anything, iOS, Android, web, or Windows, and I think probably some other targets as well. But it's a bit of a no-brainer, really, if you're going to get some components.
Yeah, if just taking the example from this book here, number one is you have a database server with connecting to a web service, that's Xdata, that's one license. Then you will probably build a VCL client. You don't need, but there are like certain grid controls for the VCL UI pack with styling and all the modern things you need nowadays. That's another license. Then you would want to build a web client. Then you need WebCore. That's another license. And if you want reporting, that's being done with Flexel. A lot of people don't realize Flexel is an excellent solution to generate reports in PDF or any other format. And so that's yet another license. So if you're really looking to build a application that has a database backend with web service, web client, and desktop clients, all access is definitely the way to go, because you pay more paying separately, and you get like additional features we don't have time today with the so-called subscription manager, which monitors which version of the different frameworks you have installed on your computer, and then you get notified if there's an update available. And installing.
And it's important to make the point as well that WebCore is something that they can buy separately. And they can also get FNC, which are the framework neutral components, which we've talked about here. They're also available separately as well. So you don't have to get all access. I'm just saying that if you do a lot of development and you want a good grid and you want, some other things as well, then all access really, before you buy too many things, it starts to become much more economical to actually just go for the all access license, and then you never have to worry about it again. You just download what you want, when you want, whenever you want.
I will make a couple comments here actually real quick. I agree with what Ian was saying. TMS is one of the components vendors I'm always like, pointing people at. It's like you got to make sure you're aware of what TMS is offering, because they offer some great stuff and it's a huge variety of things. I do have one question though I would like to throw in here. What kind of what should people consider when they're looking at the progressive web app versus a native app? What would be kind of some of the criteria that you'd use if you're making a whole new application today? Why would you choose one over the other?
Local access to local resources is number one for me. Because if you have a PWA or a web application, you are, as we just explained, inside of a browser. So you don't have access to the local file system per se. So you have to upload your stuff to the web application. You can't, and that is different with Electron. Do you want drag and drop functionality with your operating system? That is something that Electron also offers. And basically, as soon as you go to the web application or PWA, you're inside of a web browser and no longer, you're completely separated from the operating system. And Electron, the framework, gives you more access to the operating system than any web application. That is, for me, the biggest pointer.
There is another consideration as well, I think, which is that Electron is extremely popular and is used on some very high-profile applications. If anybody watched my GitHub presentation recently, or Git, the GitHub desktop is an Electron app, but it is notorious for being a beast for using a lot of memory in the computer and a lot of resources. I personally don't find it as a problem. I've got a developer machine, so I've got lots of cores available and lots of memory, but some people complain about it and say, oh, it uses a lot. A PWA is not quite that hefty, shall we say, because although you are running a browser process, it's a small process running in the background for the PWA to work. So it is more lightweight than Electron. But some people don't like the PWA and prefer Electron. Some people say, no, I don't want either of those. I just want my browser because I have my browser open already, and one more tab up doesn't take that much space. Yeah.
And a new feature from the Electron framework that is now also available in TMS WebCore is that you can connect to databases locally. So there is a connection component to connect to MySQL and to Postgres databases without a web service. So you can, from an Electron application, directly connect using a server to MySQL and Postgres. That is possible now. Whereas on the web application, you also have local databases that we also didn't mention so far. Like each browser nowadays has support for indexed DB and local DB and session DB, which basically allows you to have local storage inside of your web application. It cannot be compared to a professional database management system, of course, but it will get the job done for things like being disconnected and you want to cache something. You know, if you have your personalized individual contacts application, if you don't want to use what is provided on the phone, it's a stupid example, but let's say you do. And then, or let's say you're a lawyer and you want to download your the contracts that you need for work onto your phone with the application, and then you can download them into a local database and access them even though you're on a plane, and because it's stored inside of the browser. Of course, not comparable to a database system, but there are means to do that kind of stuff. And another thing is you can pretty easily convert a normal web application into a PWA application, because the PWA application has a few more files. So if you create an empty PWA application, you can actually add everything from your web application in there, and then your web application becomes a PWA. That is the same way for Electron. If you have a web application and you want to make it an Electron application, create an empty Electron application with a wizard provided in TMS WebCore, and then add the files from the web application, and there you go. So the only thing to remember is that if you have a web application, you cannot access resources from the operating system as you're used to in the VCL. You know, it's always fun to create a temporary file on the disk. You know, not possible. It's like I read something about that today.
Created your first virus, yes.
Yes, exactly. So that's I read something today like I can't use that component because it only has parameters for file names and I need streams. And that is true. Like if you build something on the web, you have to see where you store your data and you have to keep it in memory. You can't store it on a file, or you have to use one of the local databases that are available in all browsers. And that is the thing now. Even though browsers were a mess in the 90s, I would say, and in the early 2000s, now we have an equal playing field when it comes to indexed DB. That's what the database is called, which is available in the three big ones, which for me are the Apple, Android, Chrome, and Microsoft browsers. I realize that I said more than three, but different platforms, different browsers, but all the big ones have them.
There's a couple of questions. Can Xdata work with Interbase? I think
Yes.
you already covered that. Yes.
Because you can use any. You can either use the two natively supported, then you don't need any database drivers in addition, which are Microsoft SQL Server and SQLite. Sure. But you can also simply drop a Fire Deck connection, and the Fire Deck then handles all the database. So everything that Fire Deck can connect to works. The only issues arise with regards to SQL mapping if you want to use the automatic generation. Like you have a database and you want to create a web service with a snip of a finger. Letting the IDE or Xdata generate the web service for you, then of course the Xdata needs to recognize which kind of SQL your server uses. If you do what I did with the accident application, where you provide the SQL statements yourself, you can connect to anything that FireDeck connects to, or any other database framework that you use. I mean, if you use Unidac is still around, for example, or 80, what is it called, ADA or something, or Nexus. You can use all of them because you connect to the database in your data module. Each X data server is actually a VCL application at the core, or a Delphi application. So X data is always Windows. There is a guide that it can become Linux binary, but all the wizards that are supplied inside of the IDE create a Windows, either a command line, Windows service, or a VCL with a window. And so you can connect to any database that you want to, because Xdata at its core is a framework that returns everything that you want to publish in your services in a readable manner for all REST clients. And at this time, everything is being serialized, as you call it formally, as JSON, which is something.
I did a test with an absolute database, which is not a very commonly used database. It's a single file database, very, very efficient. And I did a test with Xdata to see if that would work, and it worked absolutely fine. And I'm pretty certain I'm probably one of the few people to have ever done that. So I can guarantee that even if you've got a slightly weird database, it will work. So that's pretty good. Just a couple of other questions, otherwise, because I'm mindful of the time. We did warn you we would be taking a little while, longer than the hour. Does the TMS cryptography pack, is it compatible with TMS WebCore?
The TMS WebCore has its own classes for encryption, which can be, because the JavaScript application runs in the web browser. We have JavaScript for encryption inside of the WebCore. So the cryptography pack is not designed to be used in WebCore, no. But there is other equivalent functionality to encrypt and decrypt information. And there's even a chat example inside of TMS WebCore that is bundled with it, that shows you how to encrypt and decrypt using modern encryption technology. So there's classes inside of TMS WebCore that cover some, not all of it, of course, of the functionality from the cryptography pack. But
I probably could have answered that myself, actually, because I did, in my app, I do actually encrypt data in the background. We're using JSON to pass some stuff around to a different service, and we encrypt in that app, and it works absolutely fine, and there's no problems. We actually paid someone to try and hack it as well, and they did not succeed. So,
and of course, practical example, if you encrypt your data for the database, the Xdata server would be the one encrypting, which would be VCL, and then you have support for the cryptography pack again, and the cryptography on the web client would be done if you use HTTPS, then everything would be inside of encrypted connections. So you would circumvent the necessity to have encryption in TMS WebCore, because everything is wrapped in HTTPS, and the encryption for the database is done via Xdata, via your REST server, so to speak. And same would be possible with the REST server, really.
I think it's one of those incidences where HTTPS is pretty much essential. If you're going to do encryption, HTTPS helps prevent people doing things like man-in-the-middle attacks and stuff like that. It's really, at that point, you're not really talking about Delphi techniques. You're talking about what goes on with the web. Because if a browser has a vulnerability that is a vulnerability in JavaScript, then it's going to apply to WebCore, because at the end of the day it's running in a browser, and if someone's got an extension that's interfering with everybody's pages, a hidden extension like a Trojan or something, this is not a vulnerability of WebCore, it's a vulnerability of browsers in general. So HTTPS helps that, but nothing is ever 100% secure. That's not how it works. Another question from Dean is, any plans to compile to WASM or WebAssembly in the future? I think I'll ask this question myself a few times.
I don't know what the current state of that is. I gotta be honest.
Bruno may answer that if he's still
exactly. please send
Yeah.
either Bruno answers it or please send an email to info@tmssoftware.com.
When I've looked at this before, there is a push with the Pasta.js compiler to support WebAssembly, but when I looked into it, WebAssembly is a very different beast to just pure JavaScript. For those that don't know what WebAssembly is, it's a bit like the days of very early Pascal where you had P code, or even the Visual Basic before, I think Visual Basic 6, where it wouldn't compile to a pure executable. In fact, Bruno's just answered. But it wouldn't compile to a pure executable, it would compile to some intermediate code. And then that was read by runtime. With WebAssembly, it's a bit more like writing pure assembly language, but obviously your compiler needs to support that. Now, what Bruno says is that it is in research, and they're looking at it at the moment. But I'm guessing as he's still typing his answer, he's going to say something like, "We don't have a time scale." So I'll let him finish his typing and see what else. Right. Discount codes. You did mention some discount codes earlier on. Do you want to just bring those back up again, Holger?
I'm on it. It's scrolling. There we go. There's some delay between me showing it and then showing up on the webinar. I think there's the codes again.
And with regard to WebAssembly, just to go back to that, Bruno's saying that they'll support modules, most likely the support modules that are compiled into WebAssembly, but it's still something they're looking into. So I would say not right now is the answer. So the discount codes, Greg, your codes are on the screen at the moment.
Yeah, I can't really see the chat or anything. Otherwise, I would
oh, good. Yes.
help,
well, there
you,
you go.
help you a little.
They're all
help
saying
you a
horrible
little
things about you, Holger. They're all saying how awful you are. Oh, no, wait, that's not what they're saying. Yeah, I think, you know, we're kind of reaching the end of the questions. Most of the others we've answered during the demos. A few people
I will
saying
take the
thanks.
question log and send it to Bruno and Holger and Ian so that they can potentially follow up with you if there's things that were missed. So that will be salvaged.
So, is there anything else, Holger? Because I think we're kind of done for now.
Yeah, as Jim said, it's a good suggestion to that we get the question log, and otherwise feel free to email info@tmssoftware.com or sales@tmssoftware.com if you have any follow-up questions. And of course, my blog has a contact sheet if you want to get in touch with me for support, contracting, and stuff like that, or feedback to the books. Always welcome.
Cool. Okay, Jim. Well, I think we'll probably call it a day then.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much, Ian and Holger, for putting this together.
Thank you for the invite.
Pleasure.
My pleasure. I always learn so much. This is definitely something I'm real excited about too. Generally, I love the stuff TMS puts out, but the WebCore is one that I'm like, oh yes, finally.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I get involved in the webinars is I have no connection with TMS. I obviously know the guys at TMS, and I know Holger very well, but I'm nothing to do with TMS as an employer or anything like that. What I am is an avid fan of their components and WebCore. As soon as I saw it, it just made a lot of sense to me as a developer. So I'm a developer, as I keep saying to people. I may be an MVP, but I make my money every single day by writing Delphi code every single day. And I have used WebCore straight away. I was able to produce some apps, and they're on sale now and being used by my customers. So, you know, that's my involvement to it. It's not difficult to help out at these webinars.
And for Jim, I put in the FireMonkey example because I know Jim is pretty fond of FireMonkey. So I put a FireMonkey demo in there to see how cross-platform, cross-framework it really all is, you know, because that is always the intent when I show examples, to show that Delphi really, with these tools, is the best tool to get it done quickly and efficiently. You know, you can do all these things over and over again and pick different things but Delphi gives you the opportunity to save a lot of time writing code because you can use the same code for different platforms and different frameworks.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and we will talk to you all later. Take care, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.